Hello and welcome to The Art of Aging, part of the Abundant Aging podcast series from United Church Homes. We are on this show taking a look at what it means to age in America and other places around the world with positive and empowering conversations that challenge, encourage, and inspire all to age with abundance. Today, I am pleased to introduce to you Daphne Johnston to the show. Daphne is the founder of Respite for All, otherwise known as RFA. She had worked for 15 years as an executive director in senior living administration when her pastor, Dr. Lawson Bryan, asked her to develop a volunteer model to provide support for families living with dementia in Montgomery, Alabama. Together, they learned that a volunteer ministry could galvanize a community and change the culture of how we all live among our friends with dementia and Alzheimer's diseases. This is my word. This is Daphne's passion project. That first program began in 2012. And in 2018, she teamed with care partner Warren Barrow to establish the Respite for All Foundation with the goal of scaling their successful model of care for families across the U.S. Her book, Reclaiming Joy Together, is a guidebook for why and how to begin an RFA community. Today, there are, I believe, 52 communities that have launched the program in 15 states. Another 9 are scheduled to launch in 2025, and that will add another 3 states to the list. Daphne is known as Boss because she is a fierce advocate for families living with memory loss. And although that is not how I address her, I can affirm that fierce advocate is definitely true. Daphne, welcome.
Thank you so much. I have to correct you. I had
a
90-year-old fella that had big, thick Ronald Reagan hair, and he was always searching for 3 fingers of whiskey down in the church basement in our respite program. The first day, he comes up to me and he says, "Sugar, you sure are cute. Dang, you bossy." Well, it just stuck, and nobody even knows my name is Daphne, and Montgomery is Boss. Thanks, Howard.
You know, no one else has started the podcast by sharing a story about somebody looking for whiskey in the church basement.
Really done some uglier words than dang, but it was good.
But just a reminder that this podcast series is sponsored by United Church Homes, Ruth Frost Parker Center for Abundant Aging. To learn more about this center, including our annual symposium in October, visit www.unitedchurchhomes.org/Parker-Center. So, as I mentioned in your bio, Daphne, you had been working in senior living world for about 15 years when your pastor proposed this idea. What led you to that conversation and to your willingness to try this new thing?
Well, I had been working with older adults all of my life. My mother worked for the Extension Service, and for 3 days out of the year, I was checked out for elder camp for 18 years of my life. And it was me and 300 seniors in a big church camp. And I knew I was going to work with senior adults. I just didn't know how. And for 15 years, I was in long-term care, memory units, assisted living, independent living. And I married 2 small children, and my minister said, "It's time for you to come to ministry because it would be a lot lighter load." Little did I know that was not the case. It became 24/7 with 2 small children and a loving husband. But we began our ministry with 2 people living with Alzheimer's in the basement of our church and 14 volunteers. And now we have served thousands and thousands of volunteer hours. I think we logged 220,000 hours of volunteer time in 2024 alone.
That is
minimal paid staff.
That is absolutely amazing. And I want to point out that you scaled this, you began scaling this. I'm going back to check the dates here. You began scaling this like in 2018.
We did.
And so this growth has happened literally during the pandemic.
It did. I think it was the only thing that did not close during the pandemic. We had roughly 20 to 25 respite communities that we had begun mainly across the Southeast pandemic happens, and I thought, we're never going to make it. We had to retool like everyone else. And we began having volunteer parades out in the parks and the church parking lots. Families would come by weekly for these parades. We made meals in our homes, volunteers did. We found a way to stay connected. And do you know that none of our communities closed during the pandemic? And what did we do afterwards but just double, expand? And it was just God's blessing for sure.
So tell me about the process of going from a single site to this idea of scaling beyond a single site.
Well, let me tell you how God works. So we start with 2 people with Alzheimer's and dementia in the basement of First Methodist in Montgomery. We open it to everybody. We said, this church doesn't want to own this. We want to be the community catalyst. We want Episcopalians, even the Good Baptists, our Jewish friends. We wanted everybody, right? It was our Jewish family that we had that had a daughter in Birmingham, Alabama that said, why is this not everywhere? She was crying with joy. She'd not seen her mother smile this much in years. It was the Jewish services of the family services that multiplied at the very beginning. And then we had the idea, hey, we don't need to go raise money for brick and mortar. We need to raise money on how we're going to spread this volunteer model. And so then other churches began organically to come to Montgomery and find out what we were doing. And we grew and we grew and we grew. And then in 2018, Warren Barrow, he was the CFO of a large construction company. His bride at 48 had early onset Alzheimer's. And she had frontal lobe. She could barely speak, but she was energetic. She loved to dance. She was a PTO, hospital volunteer, elementary school volunteer. And our model, what attracts people is people living with dementia still are plugged into work. We do service projects, and through the day, it's not a babysitting service. It's how do we all still recognize the gifts we have left? And because his wife still found purpose in helping others in our ministry, funeral home parking lot, the day we buried her, he just gave me the biggest hug, and he said, I'm going to give you a lead gift of $50,000. We're going to start a Respite for All Foundation, and you're going to take this to every state in the union, every community that we can find, because every church needs this model. And that's where it began, and we've just replicated ever since.
So why don't we step back for a minute and tell us what happens? What happens?
Okay. So I get so excited talking about respite. We forget the 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock. So our volunteer model, typically 90 to 95% of these are all in churches, but now we're breaking out in senior living senior centers, right? New organizations are seeing what we're doing. But typically, 1 day a week, 2 days a week, we will launch a ministry from 10 o'clock in the morning to 2 p.m. and fill it full of exercise, Tai Chi, yoga, group exercise, ball games. I'm a retired athlete. I still play tennis a lot, but I played volleyball. People love to compete, right? We do a lot of ball games, hand-eye coordination things. We do art and music. But another thing that draws people to our ministry and our programs are the service projects we do. We're intentional about creating opportunity for that 48-year-old with early onset, that 72-year-old Rotarian that's built your community, that's been the pillar of your church. They have given of themselves all their lives. They do not want to come to a babysitting service. They want to come where they feel purpose and they feel wanted and where they can contribute. And so through those hours of 10 to 2, we're training our volunteers how to create space and how to build our neighbors up that are living with dementia. How do we build them up to still contribute to the group? And that's what's so addictive about what we do.
So you mentioned numbers. If you have 2 people, which is what I think you started with, and you had 12 volunteers,
right?
Does that stay at 2 to 12 ratio as?
Well, let me tell you the magic of it. It is so good. It is so good. This is the breakthrough moment, right? So in my almost 20 years of long-term care and senior programs that I had been a part of or witnessed, A typical volunteer model, you're lucky if it's one-on-one, right? In the beginning of respite, it's hard to get local caregivers to understand what you're doing, right? And so with memory cafes, with respite models, with any kind of service that we're doing, it's hard to get a loved one to bring their person out while living with a challenge. So you typically only start with 2 or 3 participants. And I know God had me start that small because my favorite Bible verse to quote in this whole ministry is Zechariah 4:10. Do not despise small beginnings, for the Lord rejoices when the work begins, right? Those 2 people, 60 and an 80-year-old, began this whole movement. And yes, we kept the ratio number at 10 volunteers and 2 participants. And let me tell you why. Because if we had had 2 volunteers come to sit with 2 people with dementia for 4 hours, that's a babysitting service. That's not energy. That's not group dynamics. That's not all the ball games and all the things that we do. You have to have 10 volunteers. And so when you explain that in your volunteer training, people have this aha moment of, yes, I'm still needed when there's 10 of us and 2 people with dementia. Until you go over that concept in training, people can come to the training and fall away because they think they're not needed. But we train our directors on how to recruit these volunteers to understand this new mindset, right? And so as our participants go up to, say, 7 or 8 participants, we still keep about 12 to 15 volunteers. And then as we get to 10 participants, we might come down to about 12 volunteers. And as our participants grow, our volunteers kind of even out. But we have got a model where we have to cut volunteers back. That is so rare while working with dementia, right?
Wow. Absolutely amazing. So you talk about training your volunteers. Tell us about the training. What all is involved?
Let me tell you about this training. Over the years, I have seen training that was amyloid plaques and neurons and hard to explain chemical reactions in the brain. And you know what? There's a time and place for all of those. But in a social model setting of respite, such as we have, our training is how to be a better neighbor. How do we better our dementia communication skills? How do we build our neighbor up? How do we make it where we're all living with something? How do we set them up to succeed? How do we do the ball games where everybody's interacting and it's not us against or versus them? We are all in it together, and it's a contagious spirit that that's unique to what we do. That's our training. It's not brain science.
Now, I met Daphne 2 years ago at an ASA conference.
In Canada, yeah. Well,
it was before Canada. It was in Atlanta.
Right.
And Daphne had a table set up in a large space where other people were talking about their programs. And a colleague of mine came and said, Beth, you have to meet this woman. And he literally dragged me across the hall, and we stood. You were talking to somebody, and we talked briefly, and we've since then been able to engage a variety of different times. So I have heard some of these stories, but I would like you to share a couple stories about the effect that this has for the families and the individuals.
You are great. You are great. You know, just like our volunteer training is not about brain science, we don't have formalized marketing. We have signature stories, and that's what I tell our ministries. I want you to tell the stories that will resonate with people, not some marketing bullet point ideal thing, right? But our signature story is about a couple named Jack and Mary. Jack was about 6'2", chemical engineer over a chemical incinerator the Army had, North Alabama, where I'm from. He had Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. And, you know, I was young. I didn't know what I was really doing when we started this ministry, and I didn't know if we could keep him because he could not verbally communicate. He had rigidity of Parkinson's, memory loss of Alzheimer's, but he was in there, right? And his caregiver would not leave him. I did not know what to do with her. I kept saying, Mary, you need to, and she'd say, no, I'm not going. Well, I just let her stay. And what I learned was we didn't need a hard, fast rule on caregivers, because you know what? She was starved for attention just like Jack was. She needed to be with us at that very moment in the beginning. But anyway, 2 weeks later, I had a volunteer, unbeknownst to me, take Mary out in the hall and say, Mary, we've got this. My mom had Alzheimer's. My dad had Parkinson's. We can do this. You need to go. And so Mary comes back in the room. We had about 10 volunteers, still 3 participants, and we're all doing our stuff. And Mary comes in and she says, Jack, I love you so much. I love you so much, and I'm not deserting you. I'm not deserting you. I'll be back at 2:00. I love you so much. And we're just all watching in slow motion like, oh my gosh, do I love my husband this much? I don't know that I do. I mean, we're all questioning it. It's just, palpable. And Mary is, I'm coming back at 2. I'm coming back. I'm not leaving you, Jack. And this big 6'2" fella turns around and he looks right at her and he says, goodbye. And we all just died laughing. And you see, in that very moment, we recognize he was the one that needed a break from her. And so oftentimes in our ministries and our efforts that we do for caregivers, we're directing it all toward them. But what we don't recognize is the person living with the disease, they really need a break from that strung out care partner. They need a break from somebody that's changing the sheets every morning, doing the bills for 2, doing the doctor's appointments for 2, handling adult children that still have crazy things happen in their lives. We are not made to be together 24/7, right? And we recognize, this is a ministry for both of them, right? He has a place of belonging now. Mary came back at 2 that afternoon. It was a twofold story. And I said, oh, what did you do? Did you go to lunch? Did you go with the girls? Did you go shopping? She just laughed at me and she wrapped me up in her arms and she said, oh, dear one. I went home. I took off my clothes, put on my bathrobe, and I was alone with my thoughts for the first time in 3 years. You see, I don't have money to afford sitters 24/7. It's your church. It's you. It's these volunteers that have afforded me the chance to be alone with my thoughts. And it was a gift. And I think we take for granted sometimes just space to have time to think, right? It was just a turning point for me. Trivial was shopping and lunch, but to be by ourselves, it was amazing. So they're our signature story. They were amazing. And when I can share with directors how to tell that story to reluctant caregivers who don't want to bring their person out, right?
Right.
And we get somebody in Sequim, Washington to recognize, did you ever consider that Bill might need a break from you, Sue? Give us a try. That's how we can build up our participants. We have great efforts in all the senior organizations that we do, but when you get off to a slow start, it's hard to keep the momentum going. And so I feel like in our training method that we teach directors these stories so people can hang on to it.
Yeah. And that I've heard you tell that story multiple times, and every time I get a little teary-eyed, and part of it is,
people we know.
Yeah, we can relate to that. Most of us were in our homes with our spouses, our family members 24/7 for long periods of time. And
the pandemic really highlighted that we all.
Yeah. So when I could have actually time in the house by myself, I was like, oh, yeah, this.
It's such a blessing. And I think until we're trapped is not the right word, but until we're with somebody just nonstop, it won't sink in, right? I got to share our second signature story. It is just as powerful as Jack and Mary. The second signature story is of a little lady that was driving with dementia, and I didn't know what to do because we had never had a drive-by. And she came in overalls and a big straw hat and a green tip till, just like my granny in South Mississippi had. And she was a character. She was a little roly-poly and wide open, right?
Mm.
So she comes in and spends the day with us. And one of the things I love to highlight to visitors when they come to our ministries is our name tags, because we've got 50 to 400 name tags hanging on the door because so many people are involved in our ministries. She took her name tag off at the end of the day, took it off, slammed it on the table. And we all looked at her and she said, "Damn, this is just better than AA." And we thought, what? And we all just froze. And I said, "What are you talking about, lady?" And she said, "Nobody cares what my last name is. And you're all just meeting us where we are." Whew. I get choked up when I tell that story for the 1,000th time. Where in our ministries do we care what somebody's last name is? And where are we just meeting people where they are, right? This is not a program. I use it interchangeably. This is a ministry. That lady felt it that day. I don't even know her name. She never came back. But she gave us the vision of why we do what we do, right? Mm-hmm. Meeting people where they are, especially living with dementia.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you're right. Those stories are more powerful than telling any of the
marketing bullet points, right? I heard a lady in New York at a conference one time. She said, I gave my whole pitch, and, it was one of the first times I had spoken to a big ballroom, and she was in the way back of the room. And this was like senior services that were never going to be able to do respite. And she stood up and she was just really crying. She had tears just streaming down her face. And she said, "I might not be able to do what you're doing, but I needed to hear the story today. I needed to hear that this could happen." And I tell that all the time because you might not be able to start a pure respite ministry like what I'm talking about, but any of you that are listening to this are trying to bring good to the world, and you need to hear a story of success, and you need to hear how God's love can replicate, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's 3 things, right, that you need to start up this ministry?
3 things, very, very basic. Highly suggest you get a host church because you're going to have free space to operate. So you can afford to have that slow start of participants because you've got free space, right? Free space to operate. You've got a huge pool of volunteers ready-made. You don't have to go market, because if you get the clergy on board, they can cast vision from the pulpit. We teach people how to do that. And you get this congregation galvanized to do something new, right? It's hard to do something new besides music and kiddos in ministry. I've been doing it 15 years, and to do something new, it's brave and it's hard. But you get galvanized in that host church. You need a meal source, because we love to have a hot lunch. Volunteers and participants, we're all mixed in there together, because oftentimes we overlook the blessing of a shared meal. These families oftentimes are eating on the fly. It's not nutritious. It's not warm. And when's the last time you thought of a shared meal with friends as your biggest blessing? I guarantee you these families do. So you need a meal source. And then third of all, you need that part-time director to help you get going. And we have got a formula that's going to help you add water and stir. We have got everything laid out that if you'll just put a people person in front of us, we will teach them how to do this ministry.
And not every RFA program is exactly the same, right?
Yes, that's right. Thank you for pointing that out. So there's something in the church world called Stephen Ministry, and we love Stephen Ministry. It goes for all denominations, and it's got a model of how to care for congregations, maybe through like counseling. And we use that as our model because we want this to be interdenominational. We've now got, I think, 15 denominations started. What we recognized was that all church leadership is different. It might be in the trustees, it might be in the vestries, it might be in the senior pastor, it might be in a vision team, I don't know. But we give you this model of how to grow this ministry, and we want you to do what applies to your community. These are 15 years almost of best practices that we know work, but we don't want to shove anything down your throat. So we give you best practices of how to collect tuition, how to give scholarships, how to work with the church finance office, how to get community partners. We've got a model that offers a lot of different choices.
So tell me about tuition.
So tuition. People oftentimes don't partner ministry with tuition. But let me tell you, when you do Mom's Morning Out, I think we all have a little bit of tuition, right? And that goes to paying for quality art supplies, quality supplies, food, and a quality part-time director, because we want this person to take it seriously. But we never turn anybody away. We
Right.
charge anywhere from $20 to $40 to $50 a day for 4 hours. We train those directors how to say this is $10 an hour for the best medicine of Alzheimer's you're ever going to get. It's better than anything found in a bottle, any long-term study, because we say that respite is an immediate response to dementia. You're immediately going to walk in the door and your life will be changed, right? But we show directors how to say $10 an hour, but then we also show them how to say if your mother comes in and has no income or something's happening that's low income, we turn nobody away. We don't dive into people's finances. We just say, God, you know what? We've been blessed. Come on, we'll make space. So we show people how to have a balance. But the tuition really does help offset the cost, and that's what makes it attractive for churches to start.
Yeah. So if my church decided to do this, how long would it
Good
realistically take to get it up and going?
How long would it realistically take? I think that the fastest we've ever had one get up and going is 6 months and probably to 2 years.
Okay.
So the key is if you can identify your space and if you can identify your part-time director early on, we will share with you that hiring a director usually happens 2 to 3 months out before the start date. So
Okay.
the community champion, if you've just got maybe a caregiver in your church that's been affected by this disease, they typically can become a champion. They have lived this life and they want to see and they want to help other people start, maybe a daughter or a son that wants to do it in honor or memory of a parent, right? 6 months to 2 years, but if you can get that director identified, it'll go a lot quicker.
And the foundation has grown.
Yes. So the Respite for All Foundation started in 2018. And like I said earlier, with the help of my co-founder, Warren Vera, but now we have gotten some national grants that go through our foundation so we can give seed grants. So for instance, I think we'll get over $120,000 this year to give to about 12 to 15 churches, $10,000 seed grants. And our thought behind that is if a community church can come up with 15 or 20 and we give you 10, well, then you've got the salary of the part-time director, and that's really your only biggest cost for that first year. And then your tuition is going to kick in after that first year, and you'll kind of even out. Our seed grants are no strings attached to. We've got a great application process. If you fill this thing out, you will have a business/ministry plan. You know, oftentimes in the church world, I think people get scared when they hear the word business plan.
Right.
But it's really just a series of questions of how are you going to execute, who's going to pay for utilities, who's paying for the director, how are you going to get your food,
What liability?
for supplies. We go through in our training because this is a social model of care. If you're listening to this and you think you want to start, I want you to tell your minister this is a social model of care. We're never going to pass medicine. We're never going to give medical care. This is a ministry that combats isolation and loneliness, right? To me, it's no different than a ministry in Fellowship Hall, okay? We're keeping up with our friends, but because it's a social ministry, it typically falls up under the umbrella of the church insurance.
Okay.
So our liability is very easy, and we've got a lot of steps and resources to help any church through that process.
And the other thing that I know in conversation with you is the impact this has on the volunteers themselves.
Right. I was so fortunate because the senior pastor that helped me get this going, that commissioned me to do this, is now my partner and a retired bishop, and he's helping me spread it all over the country. He just did a research project on our 10-year volunteers. It's also a ministry that has no attrition. Once you get people in this ministry, they are hooked and they never fall away. They never fall away. He and Dr. John Bell, another volunteer of mine, researched our 10-year volunteers, and they came up with concepts that this is a disciple-making opportunity, right? This is not a babysitting service. This is a chance to put all those baby boomers in your church, to put them to work. And they don't have to volunteer 52 Tuesdays a year. That's what gets them in there. They can be in a transformational ministry and come when they can, join this volunteer pool of people that are, the pool is what makes the difference. That's what gives us our flexibility. But what they recognize is that it's changed their lives. I remember one fellow said, I've done Bible studies all my life, but until I did Respite, I was not living the word of Jesus Christ, right? I was not in the mission field. I could study all I wanted, but I was really given the opportunity to help my neighbor as I know Jesus would have. So it's a neat way to look at it. When you see our friends living with dementia as someone that is teaching us, again, it's just different than a babysitting service, right?
Right.
Just
Well,
yes.
You're honoring the fact that this individual, regardless of a diagnosis, regardless of some physical things that are happening in their brain, they're still a child of God. They still have value to contribute to the world, and you're able to respect them. We had in one of our communities some years ago a resident who came new into, I think she moved directly into a memory care neighborhood. And the chaplain, went to meet her soon after she arrived. And this woman did not want to speak with the chaplain. I mean, she was obviously pushing and like, go away. So the chaplain had the opportunity to meet with the daughter who came in to visit her shortly thereafter. And the daughter said, "Do you have some time? I need to tell you what's going on." And the daughter shared that she had moved back to the hometown once her mother had this diagnosis to care for her mom as long as she could. And that included then, going to the church that her mother had been a member of for 30 to 40 years. And one day the pastor called the daughter and said, "I need to request that you not bring your mother back to church." And the daughter said, "Excuse me?" He said, "Well, her behavior is just becoming too disruptive for everyone else in the congregation. And we're afraid that, if she were to get up and go to the bathroom, that she would get lost and wouldn't be able to find her way back to the sanctuary." And so the woman was very upset by this. She had a hard time figuring out how to explain this to her mom. So they started going to another church, but her mom knew that that wasn't her church. And so by the time it got to the point that the daughter couldn't care for her anymore and they moved to the memory care neighborhood, the woman who was living with dementia, she was so angry with the church that she knew enough to connect the dots that she did not even want to speak to the chaplain who was in the community. So the chaplain worked on that relationship, and over time she did start to come to worship in the community. But I thought, how does a church tell this family who have been members for 30 to 40 years, "Nope, you're not welcome
No
here."
space for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Not appropriate. We, one of the things that we didn't start this, but after that first year, we recognized that our families needed a dementia-friendly service. And our church is a large cathedral. We've got respites in small country churches. We've got them in medium size, large, all different sizes. But we landed on doing our chapel service twice a month. And so when we operate from 10 to 2, 2 Tuesdays a month from 1:30 to 2, caregivers can come back in jeans and a sweatshirt and still take communion. And the hardest part of that service is getting a preacher down to 8 minutes. We say, you cannot go to 8 minutes. And, that's really one of the hardest things I've ever had to do is get them to shut up. But those services are so powerful, taking communion alongside someone that might not remember their daughter or son, and yet they have their hands out for the body of Christ. And how as a church do we deal with that? Do we create intentionality where we still have open arms for these families, right?
Yeah. And we know in our memory care neighborhoods are individuals who are pretty nonverbal. They've stopped speaking for whatever reason. And when they gather in community and the chaplain is leading a chapel service, or when they go to visit them in their room and they start the Lord's Prayer, they say the Lord's Prayer, or they start singing doxology or a hymn that they're familiar with. They start singing.
It's protected in the brain for a reason. God does it. And I'm telling you, we're still a part of the collective body of Christ. I had
exactly.
I had a fella that was living with Lewy body, and he was still really with it, but had bad hallucinations. He had killed 2,000 spiders every morning, kept his boots by his bed so he could kill the spiders. That's how bad they were. And yet, our first chapel service, I'll never forget, I didn't really know what I was doing. I knew we were going to do communion, sing, and I walked out into our little area, and I said, has anybody got any prayer requests? And so hands went up. And so Ed raised his hand and he said, boss, I need everybody to pray for my daughter. She's written a lot of bad checks around town. We've got her 3 daughters under the age of 10 at my house. My wife is working full time. She's had to, go away, and we've got these 3 little girls, and I need y'all's prayers. And so everybody kind of got choked up, and Ed said, boss, I've had this disease for 4 years, and everybody has prayed for me. This is the first time I've been given a chance to ask for prayers for my family. Where in the church are we creating space for people living with a challenge to still be in the collective body of Christ? It was so powerful.
Darn it, I don't have Kleenex near me.
I know. It's good stuff.
Okay, well, it is.
I want to not forget to tell you that we've got a Respite for All documentary coming out. It's going to be roughly 30 minutes, and I'm aiming for PBS. I want the whole country to see how easy this volunteer model is, and it's really through the base of the church.
And just to mention quickly that you're going to be showing that at your annual training event. You have an annual training event that folks can come to. So the training is not just as you're getting started, but you have ongoing opportunities for the directors to train the volunteers, and for the directors and the volunteers annually to come in, and you do bring in rock stars to your annual training. As you shared with me who some of those folks are. So
in our ministry, it's not typically, the directors are not people with dementia background. They're a bunch of do-gooders that are retired, that are really ready to give back to their community. We can learn Alzheimer's, and we can learn a lot of new skills, but we need a people person, right?
Yeah.
And so our training is set up for us to have director calls once a month to train people on community partnerships, to train people on troubleshooting, dementia communication, dementia education. And then we have an annual training where volunteers, not just the director, but we'll have 200 people at our training. And these are lead volunteers that want to learn more, right? When we're alive for something, we want to grow in it, and we want to learn more.
I always love talking with you, Daphne, and you know that I have several ideas of folks I want to make sure to tell about our RFA, because I think they would be prime locations and congregations for it.
I know we've got our first outside of Columbus in Scioto Ridge. I looked it up. United Methodist. And so we've got one in Ohio, if anybody listening. I know this is nationwide, but we do have many on our website. You can look at our locations, and our goal is to get one in each state so people can drive to that location and really catch the spirit of what we do.
Great. So one thing that we do as we come to the end of our podcast is we ask all of our guests 3 questions. And we've primed you, so you've had a couple of days to think about this. So the first question is, when you think about how you have aged, what do you think has changed about you or grown with you that you really like about yourself?
I think as I have aged, it's letting go of all the small things that used to worry us. I know it's the freedom of being in your 40s, and I've been around people in their 80s and 90s all of my life, but I remember the first time in my retirement community asking, what age, what decade would you go back to? And I remember this lady saying, I want to go back to my 40s. Everybody else went back to teens and early 20s. And I said, why your 40s? She said, because you're a little more financially free. Your kids are moving on, but you've really let go of the baggage of worry about yourself. And I think in aging, we can let go of a lot of baggage.
Yeah. Nice. Question number 2. What has surprised you most about you as you have aged?
What has surprised me most? I think the capacity that God gives us on a daily basis. If you would have asked me 10 years ago, hey, Daph, are you going to start a national movement that goes into 15 states and 15 denominations and affects thousands of people and 250,000 hours of volunteer time in just 1 year alone? No. Oh my goodness, no, with a big capital N-O, right? But as many of the people listening to this podcast and anybody in ministry knows, that when you just take a moment to look back, you think, how in the world did I do that? You know that God put that spirit in you, and you know he was growing capability and capacity that you never could dream of.
Excellent. Thanks. I suspect that the last question is difficult for you because we ask you, is there one person that you've met or who's been in your life who has set a good example for you in aging, someone that inspires you to age abundantly?
I think that's going to have to be my mother, and that's probably the answer of many, but I started this ministry almost 13 years ago now, and nobody in my family had dementia, Alzheimer's, or anything like that. Now I've got multiple family members, as we all will as we age. But she is still one of the best volunteers at my respite ministry. She gets up and goes twice a week. And it's beautiful because in this space of respite, she, living with vascular dementia, is still one of the best volunteers I have with people who cannot verbally communicate. And her patience and the way she is handling her memory challenges, she stood up at respite one day last week when the volunteers told me and said, I'm taking medicine to help my memory. It's okay. It's okay. We're not perfect. And I think it's just her positivity has always just affected me. And I really didn't know how much until these last few years.
Wow. Thank you. So before we close, how can people find you?
So if people will look on the web for Respite, Respite, before I took this job, I didn't even know what the word respite meant. It means to take a break from something hard, right? And we all need a space in our lives where we can take a break from something hard. But look up Respite, FORALL.org, respiteforall.org. And you'll see just a host of 3 to 5 minute videos that you can share with your church family, anyone in your community. You'll see our locations, you'll see our theology, you'll see our mindset. We think that website is a wonderful resource.
Great. And that's how they could also connect with you personally through the website?
Yes.
Okay.
There will be a contact page. We've got a resource director. I think my email is listed on there, but now we've got staff that are handling onboarding of new communities and vision teams. What I strongly recommend, if you hear this and you're vaguely interested, order my book off Amazon, Reclaiming Joy Together by Daphne Johnston. You can read that, get some good ideas. There's a 1-2-step guide in the back of how to start a respite ministry. I wanted to just lay it all out there so you could see how easy it was before you start this process. And then we can get your vision team. I just did 25 people in Delaware a couple of weeks ago. It can be 3 people, 25, but I'll get on a Zoom call just like this, and we'll go through the slides of finances, of recruiting, and what all to happen. There's just so many resources.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Daphne. And thank you to our listeners for listening to this episode of the Art of Aging podcast, part of the Abundant Aging podcast series of United Church Homes. And we want to hear from you. What's changed about you as you've aged that you love? What has surprised you most? How do you define abundant aging, and who is your abundant aging influencer or hero? You can join us at www.abundantagingpodcast.com to share your ideas. You can also give us feedback when you visit the Ruth Frost Parker Center website at www.unitedchurchhomes.org/Parker-Center/. Thank you, Daphne. I just love spending time and being in conversation with you, and just blessings to you as you keep bringing on new organizations in these coming months.
Thank you so much for having me, and just the opportunity, and keeping the whole country together, right? I mean, the church needs each other. We are
Exactly.
the body. So thank you for spreading the ideas.